And I think that the broad consensus is that we're a bit fucked right now, that we are in a really bad shape in terms of meeting our international global emissions reductions targets in a way that would keep us under 1.5% warming. And that it's not just climate change that's the problem, it's as people have talked about at this conference, a whole host of interconnected challenges that have capitalism and colonialism and extractionism at the sort of core of that problem. And for some people, it's already too late. Like we're seeing the consequences of climate change in our day-to-day lives play out, much in the same way that we're already seeing the consequences of poverty and a welfare system that's woefully inadequate play out for working class people and unemployed people across the country. And it's pretty clear that the market isn't going to solve this problem. I mean, we don't need to engage in particularly complex economic theory to know that. You just have to look at a graph and see that it's not going to move on its own. And if we are going to kind of solve this problem, we need to do it together. And that this is a time for being strategic, because I am really worried about the way that conservatives might respond to the climate emergency that we're in, not to fix the problem, but to weaponize that problem against marginalized and oppressed communities in the ways that they've done historically. And that means that solidarity, community, and a clear strategy for coming together and organizing together is really, really important. And I think that one of the final things about the context that we're in is that if we were winning, I think that we would know about it. I think regularly about the fact that when Kevin Rudd proposed a tax that the mining lobby didn't like, they announced that they were spending $100 million to get rid of him. And they succeeded. And we haven't seen that kind of coordinated large-scale action happening from our opponents just yet. And I think that there's still a good way to go in terms of the fight that we need to have. One of the things that makes this situation even slightly more grim, and I swear it's going to get hopeful in a second, is that our political system is in some ways fragile right now and not necessarily equipped to deal with the crisis that we have. There are a couple of strategic weaknesses: a reactionary media cycle, a short-term electoral cycles, a compulsory voting system that tends to drive parties towards the centre in the way that they kind of campaign and develop political platforms, and that a lot of the time the internal democracy within our parties or institutional democratic structures aren't all that democratic, in a way that makes it very hard for someone like an AOC to come through and blow that system wide open. I think that conservatives are taking advantage of that. They're running really effective scare campaigns. They have very little in the way of an attachment to the truth. And that those things, unfortunately, in the age of digital media and collapsing trust in journalistic institutions, are working. During the election, we saw that the death tax, became one of the most prominently searched things in the final days of the election because of a coordinated, centralized misinformation campaign. We've got billionaires flooding the system with money. We should probably do something about that. And that's a real problem for progressives, because I think that, a lot of what we've been talking about at this conference is how do we create a vision for a state that's bolder and more progressive in the way that it solves the problems. But in reality, what we're seeing is that people are losing faith in that system because of the forces that are pulling it further and further away from local grassroots organising and perspectives. And let's be frank, we might have some blame on the left in the way that we think about that as well. I don't say that to be confrontational, I just say that because I think that it's really important that when we think about the politics that we're in right now, what we need to understand is that there is a real sense in which if you want to genuinely reach out to the communities that we need to re-engage in politics, we probably need to have a very careful think about the way that we do that. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second, but here's the first glimmer of hope. Climate voters are here. We saw that, and we've done a lot of research post-election about how people voted and why people voted. And more people voted on climate in the most recent election than any prior election. Climate was the #1 ranked issue for swing voters that changed their vote from Liberal to Labor. And it's the #1 concern amongst the Labor Party voters and members themselves. And so this issue is not going away in our politics. It's going to get better and better and better. And the constituency for climate action and progressive change is going to get bigger and bigger as well. And we need to be able to harness that moment. We need to be ready for that moment where that constituency doesn't just become a big swing, but it becomes a decisive swing. And we need to understand what that swing is for and have a clear vision that we can articulate for what climate action means to us as a community. And that's what I want to talk about now, which is, I think that we need to figure out a way of building a path forward together. I think that, there are a lot of conversations happening around the country right now about what a Green New Deal might look like, or what the right kind of solution to the electoral result that we just had was. One of the things that I think is really important for us to understand is that this room is not representative of the nation in which we live. I mean, you can tell that just by looking around. Or the exercise yesterday where I think it was like 90% of you own your homes. Bastards. I think that in that context, what we need is to create mechanisms and forums and frameworks, not to just put forward a policy agenda that we require people to sign on to or sign off against, but to include them in the process of writing that policy agenda and co-creating that policy agenda. Because the Green New Deal is not just a set of policies. The Green New Deal is and should be a process of engaging with one another across more diverse constituencies than we have before. Coal worker in the Hunter Valley, budget surplus. And I think that what that process is going to need to do is meaningfully engage with the affected communities themselves. And in particular, what I think that means is having a chat to the unions, having a chat to frontline Indigenous communities, and by that I mean all of them, activists and traditional owners, people whose land this belongs to still, but also having a think about all the diverse industries that need to be a part of creating that process. We also obviously need research, and we need a kind of strategic framework that ties the movement together. And I think that there are a couple of different ways of doing that are being discussed. There's already a lot of a process that's sort of bringing together some of the biggest unions in the country with the biggest climate organisations in the country and some of the biggest universities in the country to co-create a process to how we do this. One suggestion that we're working on throughout the course of 2020 and GetUp's playing a role in helping facilitate is a process called transformational scenario planning, which is a wanky kind of phrase, but it was used in post-apartheid South Africa to bring together incredibly conflicting groups, people who did not agree with each other at all about what the future of that country should or could look like, to co-create possible futures, or an understanding of possible futures, not as a proposal for where we head, or as a forecast of what will happen, but as an understanding that there are different ways that this could end up. And that if we work together in certain ways, we might end up in one place, and if we work together in others or fail to work together at all, we might end up in other places. And by building a container of trust in which those conversations can take place with a broad number of people, you begin to develop understandings of what might be unacceptable to all of us in a way that propels us towards the future that we might share together. And so I think that one of the things that I feel pretty strongly about the Green New Deal and Green New Deal politics is that rather than coming with a set of proposals or policies, the thing that we need to do is agree on the process first. We need to have a process in place for First Nations consultation, and that will take time. There are so many different Indigenous nations around the country, and we should be including as many of them as possible. That could take a year. We need to be doing the consultation work across the movement to build the vehicle for change. We need to be having a chat, not just to this room, but to rooms like this all across the country in order to bring as many people into the conversation around what policy might look like and what policies matter most to people. And we need to build campaigns that speak to people on local, grassroots, individual levels in the communities in which they live and tie that big vision to the challenges that they're facing in their day-to-day lives. And there's already a lot of organizations out there doing this amazing work, so we need to tie those people together as well, rather than sort of coming over the top as GetUp or as anyone else to sort of make that happen. So I'm pretty hopeful that one of the things that's happened post-election is that people are thinking about ways of doing things differently. And in the same way that in the aftermath of 2016, when Trump got elected, I was so despairing that I quit my job and started, working at GetUp and was sort of like, the arc of the moral universe does not seem to be bending towards justice right now. But what we've seen happen in that country is a massive acceleration on the left towards genuine progressive organizing, campaigning, and movement building that in some ways we might just yet, the 2016 election might just have been the best thing to happen to us. That's my hope.